Whether it's fear of abandonment, rejection, punishment, verbal abuse, or the silent treatment, you abandon your emotions and resist setting boundaries to avoid a confrontation because you don't want to jeopardize your relationship. Hey community, welcome back to my channel, and if you're new, welcome to my channel. My name is Janelle and I'm a mental health therapist who discusses everything trauma and mental health related. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss any of my new videos. So let's talk about creating boundaries while healing from complex PTSD. You're no longer a child and you're no longer a teenager. You moved out of the toxic environment that caused you pain. You are now left trying to pick up the pieces and put your life back together. And you probably recognize that you have unhealthy boundaries. A friend may have said, just set boundaries, it's not a big deal. But for you, it's not just a big deal, it's a huge deal. If they only knew what was going on in your mind at the thought of setting boundaries. Some of the questions I've often been asked over the years are, how do I know what my boundaries are? What if people get mad at me? What if I come across as being mean? What if I end up alone? What if I hurt their feelings? If I set boundaries, I'll have no one left in my life. The list can go on and on. These questions and statements are valid. According to Nedra Glover Tawabi, the author of Set Boundaries, Find Peace, A Guide to Reclaiming Yourself, she stated, the experience of trauma shifts our brain and body into survival mode. This is one way unhealthy boundaries become a tool for survival, especially if we believe our survival hinges on relationships. For example, let's say you're a 7-year-old who lived with an emotionally and verbally abusive parent. Anytime you tried to express yourself, your parent degraded you and gave you the silent treatment. You quickly learned that self-expression isn't okay and that parental care and love is conditional on your behavior. You keep things to yourself and you learn to please your parents because you're still dependent on them for survival. Now that you're an adult, you may still carry those wounds. You have a hard time expressing yourself. You get anxious if you perceive someone is upset with you. You experience emotional flashbacks. You're constantly worried about another person's emotions while ignoring your own. You avoid conflict at your own expense. And you accept poor behavior because you fear emotional abandonment and you crave connection. You fear that your partner, friends, or your family may withdraw their love, so you sacrifice your boundaries in order to cater to their needs. Any type of abuse experienced is a boundary violation. Whether it occurred in adulthood or childhood, it impacts our ability to set limitations. Pete Walker stated in his book, Complex PTSD, From Surviving to Thriving, that there are developmental arrests that occur in complex PTSD. This essentially means that development in certain areas have prematurely stopped. Some developmental arrests Pete mentioned include a clear sense of identity, self-acceptance, self-protection, peace of mind, self-care, self-esteem, and self-confidence, just to name a few. Those particular developmental arrests are closely tied to why folks develop unhealthy boundaries. In the words of Pete Walker, the instinct to care for yourself and to protect yourself against unfairness is forced to become dormant. Some adults beat themselves up for not being where they want to be in life or for only now learning the skills that they should have learned years ago. This ties in with what I mentioned in my previous video on complex PTSD, that it's not just about what happened to us, it's also about what didn't happen to us. Certain areas of our life went underdeveloped. It's not your fault. Dr. Bessel Kolk said, being traumatized means organizing your life as if the trauma were still going on. So every new encounter or event is contaminated by the past. He also mentioned that if the trauma has not been resolved, the stress hormones that the body secretes to protect itself, it keeps circulating, and the emotional response keeps getting replayed. The thought of setting boundaries may elicit an intense emotional flashback. These intense feelings of fear, shame, helplessness, or despair may cause you to fall back into survival mode by focusing on another person's needs, despite the impact it has to your mental, physical, and emotional well-being. There are various types of boundaries such as physical, sexual, emotional, financial, spiritual, and time. Boundaries are limits and rules we set for ourselves that set us apart from others. Boundaries also communicate to others how we expect to be treated within the environment and the relationship. There are 3 types of boundaries that I want to touch on, and only one of them is healthy. Number 1, rigid boundaries. People with rigid boundaries tend to have inflexible rules. They avoid intimacy and close relationships. They seldomly ask for help. They are protective of personal information. They seem detached and emotionally withdrawn, even with romantic partners. They have to be right all the time, and they don't allow space for another person's perspective. They have few friends, and they keep others at a distance. At the core of rigid boundaries is a fear of rejection. Number 2, we have porous boundaries. This person doesn't have any boundaries at all. They always tell people their personal information, even strangers. They have a difficult time saying no, and they become entangled with another person's problems to the point that it is emotionally impacting them and it causes them severe distress. This person is dependent on the opinion of others and is vulnerable to abuse and disrespect. At the core of porous boundaries, the person fears social rejection, so they allow others to impose their needs and wants onto them. The last one is healthy boundaries. Someone with healthy boundaries is balanced and has the ability to say no without guilt or shame, and they can receive a no response without blame and manipulation. They don't compromise their values, and they don't overshare. They know how to provide information in an appropriate way. They also know what their wants and needs are, and they can communicate them without guilt. At the core, people with healthy boundaries tend to have a good self-esteem and a good sense of self. They are confident, and they know how to accept responsibility for mistakes and misunderstandings without becoming defensive. And they are flexible with their boundaries when they need to be. Sign number 1. Do you find yourself becoming angry with others after you ask them for a favor? For example, let's say your sister asks you to watch her kids for the 5th time that week. Even though you work 10-hour shifts and you feel exhausted, you still say yes. You may believe that she doesn't have anyone else to depend on, and you are the only one who can help her. However, you're starting to build resentment towards her. You may become snappy and have an attitude with her. She may notice your passive-aggressive behavior and call you out. Instead of communicating how you actually feel, you apologize and blame it on being tired. Number 2, another indicator is avoidance. You start to avoid family and friends by not answering your phone or text messages. You continue to withdraw and daydream about running away and starting over. In your mind, it's easier to avoid the situation than cause a fight or hurt anyone's feelings because you don't want to disappoint them. Number 3, you fear saying no even if it's at the expense of your own desires, wants, and needs. You may believe that saying no is mean, hurtful, and confrontational. At your core, you may fear rejection and abandonment. By being agreeable, you believe that you're keeping the peace and avoiding people being upset with you, especially if this behavior has worked for you in the past. You also have trouble standing up for yourself even if the other person is wrong. Number 4, you experience burnout, which can affect you mentally, emotionally, physically. It can be caused by a lack of self-care, not knowing how to prioritize yourself, not knowing when to say no, not asking for help, or you think your problems are so complicated that you are the only one who can figure things out. Does any of this sound like you? The last one is people-pleasing. You are so worried about being liked that you negate your own needs to accommodate others. You have trouble with communication and being assertive. You may think you're being easygoing, but in actuality, you fear conflict and rejection, and you don't know how to set limitations based on fear. One important factor to note is that you may not know how to feel, so setting boundaries can seem impossible, especially when you can't articulate your emotions due to a lack of understanding. Don't beat yourself up for not knowing the how-to when you were never taught to begin with. Over the years, I've spoken to folks about setting boundaries, and the response is, I don't know what my boundaries are. How do I figure them out? I always bring it back to the basics. So what that means is figure out what your morals, values, likes, and dislikes are. You are starting the process of establishing the self and laying a solid foundation. For example, you may not like when your partner swears at you in an argument. You may not appreciate when your mother drops by unannounced, and on top of that, she criticizes your housekeeping. You may find your partner's behavior of lying unacceptable. You may not like when your partner arrives home 2 hours late from work without a phone call. You just met a new friend and speaking to them was a breath of fresh air because you admire their honesty and their loyalty. As previously mentioned, developmental arrests occur in complex PTSD. You are starting the process of taking back control and getting to know yourself. Another important factor to help you identify your boundaries is to identify your emotions. This can be challenging, especially if your emotions were ignored and made to feel insignificant. Remember what Pete Walker said? The instinct to care for yourself and to protect yourself against unfairness is forced to become dormant, meaning we had to surrender in order to survive. When you were a child, fighting back may not have been an option. Now that you're an adult, your view of yourself and the world has been altered. You may experience emotional flashbacks, and you may also replay emotional responses. In order to protect yourself from the past repeating itself, you engage in being a people pleaser or being passive aggressive. For example, when your partner arrives home late every day without notice or an explanation, you ignore your emotions and you pretend as if nothing happened. However, later on that night, you may be banging the dishes, you may be slamming cupboard doors, you may be slamming bedroom doors. When your partner asks you what the issue is, you say, "Nothing is the matter," and you retreat to your bedroom. Whether you fear abandonment, rejection, punishment, verbal abuse, or the silent treatment, you abandon your emotions and resist setting boundaries to avoid a confrontation because you don't want to jeopardize your relationship. You missed an opportunity to be curious about your emotions, sit with them, identify them, and establish what you need in order to set a boundary. Working with a professional will help you manage your fear so the past doesn't replay itself in the present. I tend to hear the following statements when it comes to setting boundaries. I try to set boundaries, but they just don't listen. I've spoken to them on more than one occasion, and they get mad at me. They make me feel so guilty for setting boundaries. I can't even be bothered. I completely understand how defeating this process can be and how easy it is to give up. It's important to recognize that people will test your limits, push back against your boundaries, and manipulate you. They may also get defensive, call you selfish, rage against you, and challenge your so-called boundaries. People are so used to having access to your time and energy that it throws them for a loop, and they may need some time to adjust, or perhaps they just don't like your boundaries because they can no longer take advantage of you. Let's unpack the statements I previously mentioned. The first one is, I try to set boundaries, but they don't listen. There are a few things I want you to think about. Are you stating your boundary in a clear and assertive manner? If you don't respect your boundary or believe in your boundary, no one else will. Also, are you being direct or passive? How we communicate our needs is vital to having successful boundaries. I suggest being assertive and speaking in a clear tone of voice. According to Nedra Glover Tawwab, healthy boundaries can be communicated with I want, I need, and I expect statements. For example, I want you to call me when you're going to be late from work. Mom, I need you to respect my time before you drop by unannounced. Second statement is, I've spoken to them on more than one occasion and they just get mad at me. They probably feel defensive and they want to push back. Initially, some people may take your boundaries like a personal attack. This isn't your fault. It has nothing to do with you. It's something that they will have to work through. Give the person time to adjust. They have to manage their own discomfort, and you may have to repeat your boundaries on more than one occasion. But don't explain yourself. No means no. When you explain yourself, you're allowing room for them to challenge and dismiss your boundary. In addition, what are your consequences? Without consequences, your boundaries are meaningless. For example, your mom shows up to your home as you're getting ready to go out. You've asked her on several occasions to call ahead of time before showing up. This is the third time you've set this boundary. What do? You can cancel your plans and let her in and hang out with her. You can be passive aggressive and not let her in the door, even though she sees your car parked in the driveway. Or you can tell her that, hey mom, I have plans and I won't be able to hang out with you. Why don't you give me a call and then we can reschedule another time to hang out together. Will you be uncomfortable setting this boundary? Yes. Will your mom be angry? Most likely. Setting consequences to your boundaries will let the person know that you mean business, and eventually they will fall into line. Comment below and let me know how you would handle this situation. The last statement is, they make me feel guilty for setting boundaries. As Nedra mentioned in her book, there is no such thing as guilt-free boundaries. This is true, especially if your environment makes you feel guilty for having wants and needs. For example, you may have grown up with your parents who made you felt needy for asking for the bare necessities of life. You were always told that you were a burden and what you want doesn't matter. If you didn't fall in line, you were either punished, manipulated, and you were made to feel like you were doing something wrong. Remember, guilt is an emotion which is temporary. I want you to identify the emotion of guilt, allow yourself to feel it, and incorporate self-compassion so you don't get stuck in the emotion. Remind yourself that guilt implies that you've done something wrong. Setting healthy boundaries isn't wrong. Healthy boundaries create healthy relationships. Work with a therapist on unpacking the connection between your unhealthy boundaries and complex PTSD. Setting boundaries can be challenging when you fear abandonment and rejection. Depending on your culture, you may feel stuck because no matter what you do, it's not enough to stop your parent or family member from pushing back against you. Telling your mom that you want her to respect your boundaries may be seen as disrespectful or that you're talking back. Being enmeshed can be seen as a norm and not a boundary violation for some cultures. Sometimes our parents may think that we're trying to pull away from the culture, or they may also think that they're losing control. Take a step back, try not to take their behavior personally. What I mean is, you're not a bad son and you're not a bad daughter for wanting autonomy. You are not going against your culture and you are not being disrespectful. You are adding a new perspective that doesn't have to mean you are abandoning your culture and going against the family. Sit down with your mom or your dad and have a respectful conversation about how you feel and what you want to see change. You can let them know that you still value their opinion and you still love them. You want to be clear, specific, and provide examples of the changes you want to see. If this doesn't work, you may have to manage how you interact with them. Sometimes we have to look within. We have to look at how we are contributing to our parents' behavior and what actions maintain the child-parent dynamic. Your goal is to move from child-parent to adult-child and parent role. You may have to be the one to change your behavior. Setting boundaries is about protecting your mental, physical, and emotional well-being. Permanently ending a relationship or taking a step back and minimize your emotional attachment may be the only solution. Every situation is different. For example, I've had people say, my parents are aging, even though they are extremely toxic, I just can't cut them off. You don't have to abandon them in their time of need, but you do have to set clear boundaries and you have to ask yourself, what is going to change? How are you going to keep yourself safe? We can't just engage in wishful thinking, hoping that things will get better, especially now that your parents are older. We can't always wait for the other person to change. Sometimes we have to be the one to change. You have to decide the type of relationship you want with the person, or if it's even worth maintaining a relationship at all. You have to decide if you want a superficial relationship, which means having brief interactions. Maybe you speak to them once a week, once every 2 weeks, once a month. You can also interact with them just to ensure that they get to their medical appointments, get groceries, things like that. In order to get to a place of healing and moving forward with acceptance, both mentally and emotionally, you have to grieve. Interacting with a parent or anyone who has caused you immense pain isn't easy. Pete Walker stated, "Grieving is an irreplaceable tool for resolving the overwhelming feelings that arise during emotional flashbacks. Grieving is the key process for working through the host of losses that come from growing in a complex PTSD-inducing family." Self-care is important to establishing healthy boundaries and a healthier you. When you set boundaries, you avoid burnout, you can make life easier for yourself, you regain control and autonomy over your mind and your body, and you're able to respect the boundaries of others. Give yourself permission to implement boundaries in all areas of your life. If a problem arises, try to address it with a boundary in the moment. If you can't, it's okay to circle back to the conversation and speak your truth at a later time. Asking for your needs and wants is a way to connect to yourself and allow others to show up for you. We feel seen, we feel heard, we feel appreciated, and we also feel respected. Because you understand boundary limitations, you learn how to respect other people's boundaries without taking their no personal. You'll realize that their no has nothing to do with you and everything to do with their need to set limitations in order to protect their time and their energy. If you made it to the end of this video, thanks for watching. Just want to take some time to appreciate all the people who've been liking my videos and commenting. My last video hit 2.2 thousand views, which I appreciate so much. My goal is to reduce shame and stigma around the lived experience of trauma and mental health challenges. I want folks to know that the symptoms experienced after a traumatic event or prolonged trauma is normal. You were put in an abnormal situation. There's nothing wrong with you. Even though you feel like there's something wrong with you and you carry around guilt and shame, you survived. And now it's your time to start new and build your life the way you want to live your life. Yes, it's hard and it's complicated and it's easier said than done, but you deserve a chance to experience peace and contentment, whatever that looks like for you. Thank you for tuning in, and let me know what other videos you want to see next. Leave a comment below and don't forget to like and subscribe and share as it helps my channel grow. I post once a week. Bye for now.